these industries can change extremely quickly. And I'm super bullish that it's going to happen.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Welcome, friends, to episode 65 of the Business for Good podcast. How often have you wished that more billionaires use their money to do good in the world? Well, you are in luck, because in this episode, we talk with British billionaire Jim Mellon. In recent years, Jim has been most well known perhaps for his work on human longevity research, which we discuss in a fun part of the end of this episode. But he has also become fixated on ending the factory farming of animals. As a result, Jim has learned an immensity about alternative protein and has invested in dozens of startups in the space. He even just published a book on the topic, Moore's Law, in which he discusses his views on the industry, which companies he thinks will be winners, and yes, which he thinks might not make it also. As you'll hear in this interview, Jim has little hope that humans are going to give up on eating meat. So he's betting instead on just simply making meat without the animals. In this conversation, we discuss when he thinks such clean meat will be price comparable to conventional meat, whether price parity is going to be sufficient, and which industries he thinks are the big white spaces in this sector, and more. So enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with a truly interesting person who's given a lot of thought to just how he can use his role as an investor to solve some of the world's most pressing problems that we face today. Jim Mellon, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Thank you very much, Paul. Nice to be talking to you.
Hey, it's really great to be talking with you. As you know, we met a couple years ago in person, but it's great to be talking during the pandemic, although maybe toward the end of the pandemic, it seems. So hopefully next time we'll be talking, it will be in person. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I really enjoyed your book. I read Moore's Law word for word, and it was so impressive to me to read about your story. And I'm wondering, can you just share a little bit about how someone who started out like you, not in the food and agriculture and alternative protein space, like what led you to make ending factory farming of animals your mission?
That's a great question. Well, I basically have been in biotech for quite a number of years now, and I'm very interested in the idea that the cell ag, which, as you know, is what we're focused on, industries are effectively using biotech processes. So that was one element. The other element is that I do not eat meat. We don't eat meat in this household. And I'm very anti animal cruelty. I noticed that you and your wife have a dog. Well, we can trump that. We have 4 dogs here. And so we're very positive about animals and animal welfare and our treatment of animals. So, in fact, just this week, I spoke to, I know that you will know him and probably know him personally, Peter Singer, the famous guy who wrote the first real book about animal ethics or our ethics towards animals. He's now an Australian professor, but very, very interesting. And I spoke to him. I was very lucky to be able to speak to him.
Well, that's really wonderful. Peter actually was a guest on this very podcast just a couple episodes ago. So you can go and check out that. He had a lot to say about food technology. And in addition to being a renowned philosopher and author, he's also a food tech investor and has invested in a cell-cultured foie gras company in France.
Yeah, I read about that. I don't know if I was choosing one company to invest in, if it would be a foie gras company. I mean, even though foie gras is an absolutely disgusting enterprise, it seems to me like a bit of a niche market, and it's not something that will appeal to everyone on the planet, which is how we need to get intensive farming reduced or removed, is that we have to create foods that everyone will want to eat. And there's, foie gras, caviar, kangaroo, and all these other sort of rather exotic ones are niche markets at best.
Yeah, I think that Peter's basic point about it was that he was essentially hedging his bet, that he was thinking about how much money he spends philanthropically versus as he spends as an investor. And his investments are very small because he's pretty bullish on philanthropy as well. But either way, it's still pretty cool to see Peter investing in some of the food tech that we're going to be talking about today. So let me just get straight to your book, Jim. It's a great book. It's called Moore's Law. Now, for people who don't immediately get the pun there, what is Moore's Law even referring to?
Okay, that is a great question. So Moore's Law is a riff off Moore's law, which is Moores with an apostrophe before the S, was invented by Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder of Intel, and it's more than 50 years old. And he posited that every 18 months, the price of semiconductors would come down by 50% and the efficiency would double. And it's been more or less correct all the way through. And so I kind of riffed off that with Moore's law, because in order to get to the point where the food that you and I want to see dominate the food supply chain, it has to come down in price and it has to increase in scale of production. And in a way, we're seeing that with the early cell ag products. So, as you well know, in 2013, Mark Post unveiled his first cell ag burger in London. He was backed by Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, and it is suggested, no one really knows for sure, but it's suggested that cost about 350,000 euros or close to $400,000. And today, Mark's company, Mosa Meat, claims that it can make those same burgers for $9. So that's very much on the trajectory of Moore's law. So that's where it comes from.
Okay. And yeah, one of the lesser known things that people think about when they think about that 2013 unveiling is that they did not just make one multi-$100,000 burger, they actually made two. It kind of reminded me of the line from the movie Contact when they say, when the first rule of government spending is why buy one when you can have two for twice the price. And this wasn't government spending, but it was, of course, subsidized spending by Sergey Brin. And so they actually made two of those patties, one of which they cooked up and served quite famously. The other was essentially plasticized and sits in a Dutch science museum on display where you can go see it. And I have personally seen it. It's pretty cool to see that piece of history there.
Oh, I must go and see it myself. That would be very interesting. And of course, the great thing about Mark, well, not the great thing, but one of the interesting things about Mark Post is that for 3 or 4 years after the production of that first burger, he didn't have funding. And the whole thing sort of, just went fairly dormant. So actually, the fact that it's gone down to $9 now is testimony to just how quickly these products could come down in price, over the next 2 or 3 years, much faster than I think most people appreciate.
Well, we're going to talk about that. But before we do, this actually leads quite naturally to another term that you coined. So you coined Moore's law, which is very clever, but you also termed Griddle parity. So what is that referencing there too?
Okay, so grid parity is the level at which, and it's used in the energy business, and it's very hot at the moment because of the climate change and all the investment in renewable energy. It's at the point where the renewables, such as solar or wind power, come down to the same cost price as electricity produced by fossil fuels or by nuclear power. That's called grid parity. So I thought, well, I'll just, riff off another well-known phrase, and that's and griddle parity means the point at which the plant-based foods and the cell ag foods come down to the same level as conventionally produced, intensively farmed foods. And griddle parity for plant-based foods is not very far away, as you know better than I do. In cell ag, we're looking a few years out, basically. But griddle parity will be a very big tipping point, because at that point, the taste, convenience, health benefits, environmental benefits will be greater than with conventional foods for all the obvious reasons that, your listeners and you and I know very well. But when the price gets down to the same level, then it's, the game's on, basically.
Yeah, I agree that the game is on. I have heard some people, not you, but I've heard some people say they think the game is over at that point. And I do wonder whether that's true. Like, I think there are a couple limited cases where I've actually seen plant-based meat marketed at the same exact price as animal meat. And my suspicion is that it'll take actual, undercutting the cost of animal products before they really start gaining dominant market share. So what do you think? Do you think price parity is sufficient? Is it game on or is it game over?
Well, I don't think anyone really knows, but what I would say is that the pandemic has accelerated the process. And partly because the pandemic's encouraged people in the US and the UK in particular to try out, new types of food. But partly also because I think people are increasingly aware that, these diseases, which have caused so much disruption to our lives in the last 20 years, and particularly in the last year, come from farming malpractice, particularly in the Far East. And I think there will be much more recognition that if we get a bacterial pandemic, which is what we don't have at the moment, but where we have antibiotics that are resistant to the novel diseases that might come out of zoonosis, but we would be in a much worse situation than we are even today. And so we have to do something about the food supply. And I think the governments are actually increasingly recognizing that. I don't know about the American government, the British government definitely recognizes that. And that we actually have to lower the dependence on intensively farmed animals, because otherwise we're just going to end up with another or even more pandemics and more death, destruction, and lockdowns and inconvenience for all of us.
Yeah, I think that there may be a phenomenon where, just like we're seeing more and more tornadoes, more and more hurricanes, more and more droughts, we might see more and more pandemics as well, which of course is going to be obviously very, very challenging for us as a species. But we're going to talk more about price and price parity, or maybe I'll say Griddle parity, a little bit later. But I do want to ask you, Jim, about something that you wrote in the book, which really resonated with me, because I spent a lot of my life trying to raise awareness about the problems associated with factory farming of animals, only to see meat consumption continue to rise and rise. And today we are farming more animals than ever before. Meat consumption is higher than it has ever been before. That's true in the United States. It's true in much of Europe. It's true in China and India and Brazil. Like, meat consumption is on the rise, not the decline right now. And you wrote something pretty poignant in the book, Moore's Law. You said, and I'm quoting you here, you said, "Make no mistake, simply telling as many people as possible about the problem will not solve it. More and more articles will not solve it. At the end of the day, food choices are not made in our rational brain for the vast majority of people. If they can afford to eat meat, they will eat meat." So why do you think it is, Jim, that so many well-intentioned people believe that just raising awareness and telling people about the problems are going to be sufficient? Like, that it obviously hasn't worked, and yet still so many people who care so deeply about this issue are persisting in that type of a strategy.
That's very good. I think ingrained behavior, probably. We're all, you and I were probably brought up, in an environment where meat was eaten, and it just became part of our daily lives. And it is distressing that, meat consumption continues to go up, because every time that meat consumption goes up, so does the suffering of animals and all the bad things associated with the production of that type of meat. However, let's look at some positive things. People like yourself, for instance, proselytizers in a very positive and articulate way are important, but as we both agree, our voices are not sufficient to change things. The second thing, however, that it is changing is much more money is coming into this sector, and money drives enterprise and change. And as more money comes in, and by the way, it is beginning to flood in, I think you'll see not just a greater consumer choice and better products for consumers, but you'll also see a greater recognition by consumers as these companies have marketing budgets and they make themselves better known, which in turn will reduce. And the tipping point for meat should be about 2 or 3 years away, in my opinion. The next thing is, of course, environmental change. Now, I don't know how many people are cutting back their meat consumption because it is a massive contributor to environmental change. But what I will tell you is that I think that the carbon credit system, which is beginning to sprout up around the world in quite a big way, particularly in Europe and also in Asia, will force meat producing companies to pay effectively what are quite heavy taxes, and novel food companies to gain from carbon credits. So the umbrella of pricing from conventional foods, which will rise in price, will be very positive for the industry that you and I champion. In other words, they will benefit from the fact that the conventional foods will become more expensive, not less expensive, as a result of the imposition of these carbon taxes.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I do want to talk about the idea of meat taxes, but you've made this claim a couple times now during this interview, and it's probably the boldest claim that you make, because
it's not a meat tax per se. It is a tax on anyone who produces large-scale carbon emissions.
Got it.
They're called carbon credits in Europe, and basically what they trade for large amounts of money, huge amounts of money. So let's say you're a coal producer or you're a chemical producer using, or a cement producer. You have to buy carbon credits from people who actually are virtuous. And this happens in the United States very much. The only reason that Tesla's made any profits is because of the sale of their carbon credits to car companies or auto companies that aren't sufficiently electrified.
I was stunned when I saw the numbers of how lucrative those credits are for Tesla. It's an incredible amount of their revenue is coming from just other car companies paying them.
Yeah, so it's not specifically a meat tax. It's just a tax that's going to, and it is a tax, of course, it's going to work very well for the industries that you and I support.
Well, let me just ask you then, we have tobacco taxes, we have gasoline taxes, we have alcohol taxes. Do you think that any countries will implement actual meat taxes?
I mean, I think that the sugar taxes don't seem to have been very effective. I think Denmark was the country that tried it most vigorously, and it didn't seem to work. Meat taxes, I don't know. I mean, I think you'd know better than me. My own view is that it's unlikely. Too many vested interests, too targeted towards a specific industry. But as part of a broader brief, which is, anyone who produces large-scale carbon emissions is going to have to pay a tax, that encompasses the conventional meat industry, and that's got to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the things that I think I was particularly buoyed by your optimism on is this issue of when we're going to reach griddle parity here. So, you write, and what I really thought of as like your boldest claim in the book is that you think that clean meat or cultivated meat or whatever you want to call it, meat grown from animal cells, could reach griddle parity within as little as 5 to 10 years. So let me ask you, Jim, plant-based meat has been on the market for decades. It's never reached price parity for the most part. So why do you think that cultivated meat is going to be able to do it so quickly when plant-based meat hasn't been able to do it for decades? Okay,
so I think, of course, plant-based meat's been on the market for decades, but it has been taking off latterly because of the improvement in its quality, the food innovation, the technological innovations that have occurred, and as we all know, companies like Quorn or Beyond or Impossible or Meatless Farms or whatever have been doing very well as a result. And so consumers are much more accepting of it, and you see it much more in supermarkets. And in my country, in the UK, you can't walk into any one of the big supermarkets without seeing a substantial amount of this plant-based meat on sale, whereas 5 or 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen it. The same goes for dairy alternatives. I mean, I think the figure in the United States is going to be that 1/5 of the dairy market this year will be alternatives. And it was 0.5% as recently as 10 years ago. So, yes, there is massive traction occurring in the plant-based foods. It may not be visible to everyone yet, but it is happening, and it's going to be very, very big. As the scale increases, of course, the price starts to come down because, the more that you make of something, this Moore's law, the lower the price. In cultivated foods, the reason why I'm so bullish is because, my colleagues really examine all the input prices into cultivated foods. So they're looking at the media price, they're looking at the growth factor price, they're looking at the bioreactor price, the scaffolding price, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are coming down, and they're going to come down even more, and particularly in the growth factors, we think. And so ultimately, we model that the input price or the inputs into cultivated foods will be about 2.5 to 1. Now, you know as well as I do that in cows, it's about 25 to 1, and chickens, somewhere between 6 and 9 to 1. So the capacity for these cultivated foods to come down below the price of conventional foods, and quickly, by the way, is absolutely there. And I think, yes, I think 5 years is a bit of a stretch, but I think 10 years, absolutely likely. And it's not just me saying this. Rethink X, the very esteemed UK consultancy, thinks that by 2030, half of all the meat eaten in the world will be either plant-based or cell ag based in a roughly equal quantity. So, we're at a very massive tipping point. Now, I'll get back to the dairy stuff here, Paul, because your two biggest dairy companies in the United States, Borden and Dean Foods, have gone bust because of the encroachment of the alternative plant-based milks. And that's before you get the perfect day and no-quo type, actual replicas of dairy milk coming onto the market, which will be quite soon. So, these industries can change extremely quickly. And I'm super bullish that it's going to happen. My big concern with this whole industry is not that the technology isn't going to happen or Moore's law won't work or that, the regulators will get in the way or the lobbyists will be so strong as to stop the progress. My big concern is the execution risk. Can these companies actually go from nothing to something big in a relatively short space of time?
It's very hard to create something from nothing, let alone to do it effectively and successfully. And I, too, am concerned about that for a variety of reasons and a variety of companies. And, we've already seen a number of companies that were founded and looked promising at one point, either stall or fail. And so we can talk about that because you're actually pretty frank in the book about companies that you think are promising and companies you don't think are promising. Maybe we can talk about that in a bit. But I just want to confirm what I hear you implying and what I thought you were saying in the book as well, which is that you really seem to be even more bullish on cultivated meat companies than plant-based meat. Now, of course, I know you invest in both, but let me just ask it to you this way. If you could only invest in one, what would you advise investing in, cultivated or plant-based?
Well, I would actually invest in cultivated. And the reason is not because I don't think plant-based is, and that's what we eat here, for instance. We have Beyond Burgers often in our house. It's because the IP protection in the cell-based stuff, and bearing in mind my background is in biotech, is much stronger. And the moat that these companies can build up around themselves is greater as a result. So I prefer it from that point of view. I also think that there is a wider variety of opportunity because we're not just looking at foods. Obviously, we're looking at materials. We're looking at all the stuff that about the leather, the threads, the collagen, which gives a bigger combined total addressable market to the plant-based, to the cell ag companies than for the plant-based companies. So it's not just about food.
Okay, well, fair enough. Good point. Okay, so Jim, you wrote in the book, you say, quote, there is no humane way of farming animals. And then you go on and you start talking about fish and you're saying, I quote again, humans are literally at war with fish, using quasi-military techniques to scoop up as many as possible of the creatures, depleting supplies, and in many cases, destroying them. So you are invested in some of the alternative fishing companies, and I know that you're pretty bullish, or maybe I should say fishish, on them. So tell me about who you've invested in, and if you want, why you haven't invested in others, since I know you share some pretty frank thoughts in the book on this topic about who you think are going to be the winners in this space.
Okay, well, in fish, now fish is interesting because it will be faster to the market. As you well know, Blue Nalu is very likely to be on the US market by the end of this year. The price of its mahi-mahi fillets will be approximately twice that of the regular retail price, but that's not a huge gap. That's on small production of only a few 100 kilograms a week. My absolute standout favorite is Blue Nalu. I think that they have a platform technology that's really, really good. They have engaged with their regulator, which is the FDA, on an exclusive basis, since the fish only is regulated by the FDA, unlike meats, which are regulated by both the USDA and the FDA. And they have a very veteran management team that we have high confidence in. So I think that, and the other great thing about fish is that, yes, there are so many reasons why you would want to eat cultivated fish over farmed fish or wild caught fish. Toxins, antibiotics, microplastics, you name it. We are all familiar with the fact that if you eat fish more than twice a week, your level of toxins and mercury can go up significantly. So you've got to be very careful about how much fish you eat, and that doesn't happen with the cultivated fish. So I think fish is going to be the first standout success in this area, if you leave aside dairy products. And Blue Nalu is the absolute top company. Now, there are other companies in the field. We have invested in Chiok, which is a Singapore-based company engaged in the production of shrimp paste, which is an Asian type of thing where you don't actually have to have a structured shrimp. You just get the shrimp taste effectively. In terms of winners and losers, I would say that Blue Nalu is an obvious winner to me. I'm not sure about Chiok, but we went into it early, and I'm not sure that that was a wise course for us.
Okay. Well, we've had this
without saying any more, because I don't want to get a lawsuit from Chiok Meats, but it's not one of our favorites.
Well, we've actually had the CEOs of both of those companies on, both Sandhya and Lou, respectively, from Chiok and Blue Nalu, on past episodes of this show. So if people want to learn more about those companies, you can go back and listen to those. They're both really interesting interviews. So, okay, I was surprised, Jim, in the book when you talked about Quorn, Quorn, the company making fungi-based meat out of the UK. I was surprised that you were not more bullish on them, because they seem like they've been a really major success story to me. I mean, they got acquired for a huge amount. They've done well. And you basically said that you don't really think that's going to be the future of the alternative meats, and that you thought maybe at best it would be something like a filler for sausages or sausage rolls or something. So why do you think that? I mean, why do you think that Quorn is at best going to be a filler as opposed to becoming maybe like a Beyond Meat type success?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's because it is. I mean, Quorn is largely fillers for sausages and for pasties, which are the things you don't have you don't eat as much of in the United States. But it's also it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you know that it's owned by a Filipino company called Nissin Foods, which is a private Filipino company, and there is a husband and wife team at the head of that. Henry Sasanto is the husband, and he is actually a personal investor in a number of these cell ag companies himself. They bought it, you're right, they bought it for 400 and something million pounds. I think it was a very astute buy. I think it's going to be successful. Nissin Foods itself is going public on the Filipino stock exchange at the moment. I just don't regard it as Nissin Foods is making noodles, and it's making all sorts of other food as well. It's not it's not its main division. It's not the reason that you would necessarily buy Nissin Foods. So it's from an investment point of view, it's a bit like buying Kellogg's, which on the basis it's got one or two investments in promising new food companies, but we all know that Kellogg's is actually about cereals and its regular lines basically. So it's all diluted in the mix. That's why. It's not that I don't think Quorn's a good company. It's just I think that the Quorn element of Nissin is small.
Got it. Yeah, I was surprised by it because I'm a regular Quorn consumer myself. I actually really enjoy. They have a number of their lines are vegan, and I think they're really good. But I'm also, as you know, and may disagree with that. I'm a fan of getting meat companies to use less meat, and so if Quorn is selling its mycoprotein as something that's going into sausages, so that meat companies can use fewer pigs, I'm quite pleased by that. I think that's a good idea. So, what do you think?
Well, it is. That's what you do, and very successfully. So,
Thank you.
I think that's one of the key elements, and as you rightly point out, reducing overall consumption of meat. Not just because of the animals, but because it's good for people to eat less meat.
Yes. Yeah, that's how I feel about it. And, if you look at, you're talking about like Rethink X and some of the other reports, even their most bullish projections show that within a decade, maybe plant-based meat can be 10 or 20%, or cultivated and plant-based meat can be like 10 or 20, or maybe even 30% of the total meat market. And that to me suggests that the vast majority of meat for a long time is going to be coming from factory farmed animals. And so if we can get that meat, that will still be the dominant source of meat for people to have less animal protein in it and more plant protein. It's going to be better for animals, better for their health, better for the world in general. And so I think it's a good strategy. I don't think it's the only strategy. I'm not saying I think it's the best strategy. I think it's a good supplemental strategy. And I will put in a personal plug. In the book Moore's Law, you rate all the companies. I mean, scores and scores of companies in the back of the book there with your rating of 1 through 5 stakes of how promising. And I was quite proud that the Better Meat Co. got 4 out of 5 stakes in your book, Jim. So thank you for that. We're honored by it, and we
Having spoken to you, I guess I better give you another one as well.
Okay. In the second edition, we want to get 5 out of 5, but no, we're honored for 4 out of 5. That's good because
in the next edition, you're definitely 5 out of 5.
Thank you, Jim. Yes. Well, if Beyond Meat got 5 out of 5 and putting Better Meat Co. at 4 out of 5, I'll take it. Okay, so let me ask you, Jim, you have diligenced huge numbers of companies. You know so much more about the space than the average investor in here. You've written an entire book on it. Surely, though, there are companies that don't yet exist that you think could exist that maybe could do a lot of good and would be lucrative. So are there any freebies that you're willing to give away here? Companies that you think, hey, if these folks had a good business plan, maybe I'd consider investing in them. Are there any company ideas that you want to throw out there for anybody listening who might be thinking, hey, I'd like to start my own alternative protein company?
Answer to that is not really, because we're about to create a white space company ourselves under our Agronomics brand. And so that's obviously taking technology from a research institution and backing scientist entrepreneurs, which is the way that we operate in our biotech businesses. But if I was looking at it from a startup point of view, one thing is obviously you mustn't infringe the patents of the existing companies, and that's something to look at very closely when you're starting your company up. But I think the whole geographical spaces in which entrepreneurs should be thinking about setting things up. I spoke to Credit Suisse's conference for Asia or Asian investors last week, and there's almost nothing in Asia. We talked about Shiok, there's CellX in China, there's Avant Meats in Hong Kong, there's Integriculture in Japan, but really very, very little. And yet Asia is going to be the largest market for, it may already be, for animal proteins in the world. So surely there should be more innovation out of Asia. I also think in my own country, the UK, which imports half of its food and has a very long-standing background in biosciences, which is the basis for a lot of this stuff, we should be starting more companies. And I do believe the government is going to be encouraging that. Because at the moment, the 3 clusters of that we see are your country, the United States, obviously always the leader in forward-thinking technologies, and then Israel, and then Holland. But we don't see a lot really in many other parts of the world. So I think regionally people should be thinking about setting up businesses. In terms of the low-hanging fruit, I wouldn't go into any of the niche markets because there's so much to do in the mass markets. And if you're not infringing anyone's patents, I would think that in any of the material areas, there's still white space opportunity. And in the ground meat market, I think there's still quite considerable opportunity. And of course, in fish, I think there's opportunity. And then, the dairy companies, the Perfect Day, which has raised a huge amount of money, and which I think will do incredibly well. We invested in a company called Legendary, which is out of Berlin and is seeking to use the same processes as Perfect Day to produce mozzarella substitutes. But surely there are other opportunities in cheese and in other dairy products for entrepreneurs around the world.
Great. Well, that's exciting. And I totally agree. There is an ocean of opportunity in alternative seafood, pun certainly intended. And if I were making my own recommendation in this space, I think there's so much more room for more companies in that space. So hopefully some of them will be coming into existence. Maybe some of them will be inspired by your words here, Jim, and we'll decide to get started after hearing you. So let me ask you, you talk in the book about in the future, when we're raising far fewer animals, you think that there will still be some farm animals, like we still have some, horse-drawn carriage rides and so on in cities. And then you say you think that the affluent may still eat some hobby animals. But let me ask you, if we get to a time when there are so few animals being raised, do you think people will allow that? Like, you think that there will be a time when so few animals are being raised that the consciousness surrounding the treatment of animals changes sufficiently that people would not even allow that type of hobby animal consumption, as you call it?
Well, I would hope so. I just don't know. And it would be great if that was the case, because it is, well, I mean, we're preaching to the converted here, but it is an absolute scandal about, the way that food is produced. And there is no, I mean, we're all just made of cells, aren't we? So there is no justification for slitting anyone and any sentient being's throat in order to eat it. There is none. And so it doesn't matter if it's, massaged in Kobe and fed beer and, lives in a lovely bucolic environment, and then, it's slaughtered when it's, sort of gentle and humane fashion. It doesn't make any difference to me at all. I would like to see it all eradicated.
Got it. Okay. So let me ask you then, are there any resources, Jim? So for people who share your vision of a more humane, more sustainable food system, they maybe are thinking, I'd like to become an investor myself, or maybe they're thinking, I want to join one of these companies or even start one of these companies. Are there any resources after they've read Moo's Law that you would recommend that they check out that have been helpful for you or for other people that you would recommend to them?
Yeah, I think you go to the Good Food Institute, look at their website, look at their free to view or free to read information, which is very good. I'm a big fan of, and I know you are too, of Bruce Friedrich and his team. I think they're the best initial point of contact, and they are also commercially savvy in the sense that they know what the landscape is like for new companies, and they can be very helpful in that respect. And I just think they're very good people. Then there are multiple books on why we shouldn't eat animals, and there aren't many books about. I read I think it was Chase Purdy's book about effectively about Eat Just or Just Eat, but it covers some of the other companies, including Memphis Meats. That's an interesting read, but it's more sort of journalistic and anecdotal than the one that I've written, which is basically here are all the companies. This is what we think of them. Here's all their contact details if you want to get in touch with them, which I think is probably the better way of doing it. It's important to remember that there are, as far as I'm aware, not one of these cell ag companies that is public yet. And it won't be very long before they are. I'm sure the SPAC boom is going to introduce some of these companies to the market. But at the moment, it's very difficult for retail investors or for non-institutional investors to get invested in this area. And the other thing, is to get in touch. I mean, I don't know how many emails you want to get, Paul, but people like yourself are great points of contact. Very happy on LinkedIn for people to get in touch with me. I'll put them in touch with the right people. I think the more people that join our party, the better, frankly. And if you are an entrepreneur and you're looking for funding, then we are always interested in looking at good ideas and business plans and seeing if we can be of help.
That's fantastic. And we will certainly include then your LinkedIn in the show notes of this episode. And people can always contact me through the website, businessforgoodpodcast.com. I do get emails literally every day with something relating to some questions for resources or something else that people are seeking. And I'm always happy to hear from people. I view my role as really more than my own company, of which I'm very proud, but also as somebody who's trying to bolster the entire alternative protein space so that it won't be alternative for much longer, that it'll be the mainstream and rather than the alternative protein. So I appreciate that, Jim, and it's wonderful of you to make yourself so available to folks. Now, let me ask you, finally, one of the things that you were most well known for prior to being an alt protein investor was somebody who has an intense passion for longevity. And when we met first a couple of years ago, you were telling me, you were essentially regaling me with tales of how you believe that maybe even the first person to live to 200 will have already been born. So not how long would you like to live, but how long do you think you're going to live?
Well, my dad's 92. So I'm hoping I hope he makes it to 100 and plus.
Okay.
He's in good form. He's actually the oldest public company, director of a public company in the UK. Yeah, and he's been learning Italian in the lockdown and all that sort of stuff. So stay engaged is one of the messages. It is obviously the pandemic has thrown a lot of stuff up in the air, and and unfortunately, it's demonstrated that older people are much more susceptible because of their lowered immune systems to disease, and that we need to build up those immune systems. And there are many, many projects in the works to do that. The company that I was regaling you about, Juvenescence, is now valued at close to $1 billion, and it's about to go public. So, the industry, rather like our industry, the new agrarian revolution industry, is beginning to take off and attract serious money. But it's still the dial-up phase of the internet. It's we don't exactly know what's going to work, but we know something's going to work. But I can tell you that in 10 or 20 years' time, there will be pills that you and I can take that will improve our health span, which is the number of healthy years that we live, that we're not sitting and dribbling in a chair in a nursing home or a care home until the end of our lives. That will be much more robust. And there are strategies that are being developed in close proximity, which will allow us to live 3, 4, 5 extra years. And those years will snowball. There'll be more and more of them. So I don't think that anyone is alive today who's going to live to 200, but I think 150 is a very good target. And who knows? It might be you, Paul.
I think there's a lot of people who would rather it be somebody else, but I'll take it if that happens. So hopefully you and I will be centenarians, and we'll be enjoying our time together, and your dad will still be alive, and we'll be taking whatever these magic pills are. I'll look forward to it. I'll sign up for them. Don't worry. Very good, Jim. Well, it's really great to talk with you. Congratulations on the book. I can attest that not only did I enjoy it, but I actually sent it to one of the investors of the Better Meat Co., who's on our board of directors, and he read it and was raving about it, saying how useful he thought it was as well. So from a real bona fide investor right there, you got a great endorsement. So thanks so much for writing it. Thanks for all you're doing to help advance this space, Jim. And we'll look forward to continuing to cheer for all the entrepreneurs in here together.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.